The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
On the third day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding about 100 liters. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory. And his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother, his brothers, and his disciples, and they remained there a few days. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
You know, the wedding in Cana is so well known as a story. I mean, non-Christians know it. They know about isn't the fellow you believe in, he's the guy who changed the water into wine, because the other one is he's the guy who walks on water. So it's kind of intimidating to preach on it, to find something that hopefully will connect with people. And it's so tempting, actually, to retreat toward a review of, say, how the church has historically understood this event. And that is to focus on its symbolic importance. You know, it's, for example, an instance of Mary's power of intercession. She prompts Jesus to help out at the wedding. Another is it anticipates the wedding of Christ and his bride, the church. Of course, that's incorporated into much of our prayer today, and so on. You know, it's all kind of big picture stuff. What an analyst might call the view from 10,000 feet, to see that bigger picture that this paints and informs. But, you know, it's not terribly personal, and that seems at odds with the setting. And Jesus is at a wedding. And at least in my experience, these are intensely personal events. They involve 2 people with a profound personal connection. And the invited are others who have personal connections to that couple. You know, and it's actually been speculated that this is a family wedding that Jesus is attending, and that explains why his mother's there. You know, maybe this is one of his cousins getting hitched. So in it, there's likely a personal connection for Jesus. Nonetheless, for all the personal that is intrinsic to these weddings, all the weddings we've ever been to, they are also filled with rich and timeless symbolism that imbues the event with universal significance. Because of its personal, intimate nature as celebrations of families, close friends, and so on, you know, it actually helps connect the personal to the universal, the worldly to the divine, our fleshly, time-limited existence here, to the transcendent and eternal spirit of life. So, now as much as I could head off into a theological discussion about how the turning of water into wine illustrates Jesus as being both in continuity with and yet transformative of the legacy of Israelite religion, I'm concerned to find that personal dimension, because that makes it relevant to you and me, far more immediately. And what strikes me is how Jesus here intervenes to save a marriage, a particular marriage, just as he restores sight to a particular man, casts out a demon of another individual, raises one little girl up from her deathbed. Jesus saves on the cosmic level, yes, but he saves you and me as individual persons. He saves us as married couples. He saves us as distinct families. He saves us as real communities of friends. For he is our friend, our brother, even as he is Lord of all. And this teaches us that in our lives, when we seek to connect ourselves to the divine, the transcendent, the eternal, the sacred, God will respond. Christ will respond if he is invited to sit at the table. And it's also quite wise to see that on the invitation you give him, that +1 is his mother. That we have her grace our family gatherings too. Now, some of you may be familiar with a popular and somewhat sentimental religious picture that I grew up seeing it looked like everywhere. And it's this picture, and you probably know it, it's of Jesus standing at a door, his hand lifted to knock. He's often sort of turned halfway, and he's like this. So you can see him about to strike the door. And beneath it, there's an inscription that usually says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." It's from Revelations. That image is a curious reversal of the parables Jesus tells us about people who come and bang at the door of the wedding feast, demanding to get in, but are told to go away because the Lord does not know them. And if you know the verses, they continue, "If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in to you and eat with you, and you with me." You know, we really don't know anything about the couple who've just married in this gospel story, but we know they've invited Jesus to the feast. They've opened the door, even if they really don't know who it is who has come in to eat with them. We also know had Jesus and his mother not been there, the social disaster that was looming would not have been averted. And it would have been a disaster that could have marred that marriage through an embarrassment that could easily have pitted the two families against each other who had just lately been brought together at the wedding. As you know, they throw blame back and forth over who is responsible for this debacle of the wine running out. And that was serious, serious business. You know, a number of years ago, as a parish activity, I organized a Galilean meal. It was called An Evening in Galilee. And the planning committee all made sure that we were going to have authentic food and the correct music, and we arranged ourselves in classical fashion around the perimeter of the room. We were to incorporate all the ceremonies expected in such a meal. Now, it wasn't a Passover Seder, but the kind of feast that Jesus and his disciples would have enjoyed when they were invited, for example, by a local synagogue leader, you know, the Pharisee, the tax collector, to come and be with them, join them in a feast. And in part of my preparation, I approached for advice a colleague who is of Lebanese extraction, and a man who had spent quite a number of years in the Middle East. And I asked him, you know, what are the necessary elements of an ancient banquet in a place like the Galilee? And he told me, well, whatever you serve, it's not important what in particular you serve, but whatever you serve, there's got to be lots. There should never be any sense that you're running out. People should feel entirely uninhibited about having, you know, seconds and thirds. He said, remember, it's not a family meal. And not a family meal at the end of a regular working day. It's not a private dinner with one guest. It's a feast to which you have invited guests whom you wish to honor with your hospitality and do it in a public way. And then when you think about a wedding feast, that takes it to the next level of expectation. Not just lots of food and drink, but a crazy amount of food and drink. And that is the cultural norm for that part of the world. A common expectation that everyone would have who was arriving to be at that wedding feast. And you disappoint that expectation at your peril. And you know, actually, we kind of know this already, because most of us have been to weddings and other occasions that clearly require a feast. I certainly have. And you know, the rules are pretty constant. You know, I've been to a West Indian affair, and the jerk chicken was just heaped this high on the plates, on the platters. And the coolers were overflowing with bottles of Red Stripe beer. I've been to Greek weddings, you know, there's lambs on the spit and the ouzo is flowing. Of course, I've been to Croatian occasions where there's, you know, the plum brandy at the door, the Slivovitz served in shot glasses as you come in. And it's an absolute scandal if anything less than 3 kinds of meat are served at the dinner. To run out with a good part of the night still ahead of you is just a disaster. And it figures as an omen. It does not augur well. It's a really bad sign. And this is what is looming at this wedding in Cana. And then Jesus does his famous miracle. He saves the day. And I wonder, how conscious the bride and groom were about their situation. Had they been told the wine was running out? Or was it just Mary catching a worried exchange between the chief steward and one of the waiters? Did the father of the bride know? Did the mother of the groom know? Or was all this behind the scenes, a moment that John has brought to light for us in his gospel? It's an episode that does not figure in the other gospels. It's a little story, an anecdote, but one that John thought was more than just that there's something very important in it. Very important in having Jesus at the table. Now, I've alluded to the fact that, I dragged my feet with respect to popping the question to my future wife. I apologize for the awkwardness of having your priest talk about his wedding, but I want to speak from knowledge as opposed to speculation. The question finally got asked, and the wedding date was finally set, out of a resolution in part of a spiritual crisis that had occurred in my life. I certainly didn't understand getting married as being the answer to my problems. Don't take that meaning from what I have to say, but getting married to the woman I loved then and love now was part of getting my life in order, following Christ, setting my feet on the right path. And for too long, I was not on the right path. I can't say I was on any path, to be frank, and I was wandering through life that went from being sort of a carefree sojourn to being something like a desperately thirsty man lost in the wilderness. And of course, being a young man of these times, of this culture, the last place I thought to look for help, to find life-giving water, was in the faith in which I had been raised. So I did a lot of, new age spirituality nonsense first, before I came to my senses and remembered what I was taught as a child, but neglected to nurture into a mature faith. In some sense, I remember that sentimental old religious picture of Jesus at the door of our hearts. And at last, I opened it to him. I won't go into all the details, but the wedding was done on the proverbial shoestring. But somehow, there was more than enough. Somehow, a small church full of people got fed, and the leftovers were sufficient to serve Monday for the lunch in the community soup kitchen that operated out of the parish hall. The music was glorious. Apparently, I was too distracted to really listen. I'm told it was great. And Biserka, my wife, was resplendent in her gown, and I think I looked pretty good in my suit. But really, it shouldn't have been as good as it was. We spent less on the wedding than some spend on just the wedding dress. It was a church wedding, and it incorporated people of faith, but also some of, I'd say, uncertain belief, who responded to us as that young couple finally headed to the altar with hardly any money, uncertain prospects, but with a groom who finally understood that living, getting on with life, is an act of faith, that one better know in what or in whom one should place that faith. It's someone who needs to be invited, not just to the wedding, but into the house, into the home, into the marriage, into one's life, a guest, but also a friend who has likely helped me when I never even knew it, rescued me when I was unaware of any peril, blessed me even as I was too distracted to notice. The good wine is served to me, to us all who invite Christ to sit at our table. So we need to recognize its excellence and thank the one who provided it, who makes of tasteless water a fine vintage for us, who provides this for our feast. Amen.